Hello, I'm Andrew Suskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based in West Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictions. Welcome to our podcast, which I call It's Not About the Sex, also the title of my recent book. Here we focus on all topics related to compulsive sexual behavior, often referred to as sex addiction. In particular, we explore ways to build long-term, sustainable recovery while establishing more meaningful connection and greater intimacy. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints, brand new perspectives, and practical user-friendly tools toward living a more deeply connected life. Let's get started.
Buck Dodson is a board-certified life coach and licensed psychotherapist who is all in on helping gay men, women, and allies reimagine midlife to live with more freedom and joy, give and receive abundant love, and share more of their gifts. Buck hosts the Gay Men's Life Lab podcast, and you can find him at buckdodson.com, on Instagram at buckdodsoncoaching, and by email at buck@buckdodson.com. I also have to add to this bio that I have known Buck a long time. I was privileged to have Buck as an associate in my private practice here in Los Angeles back in 2005.
That's right, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So we're talking about 16 years. And Buck left Los Angeles and is now based in Austin. And I'm just so pleased to have him here today to have a conversation. And the conversation that Buck has chosen to focus on is called Sharing Your Gifts and Activating Your Superpowers, which is a very provocative title. I love that. So tell us about the topic. What does that mean to you, really?
Yeah, so sharing your gifts and activating superpowers came to me. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Andrew. I'm just so thrilled to be here with you after our long journey together. So it's just so exciting to be here on your podcast.
Of course.
But, sharing your gifts is something that I came to as my work in midlife with clients and also in my own midlife process of really it being about coming to terms with really who I am, who we are at our, most true, our essence. Because really what, the central task when I'm working with clients at midlife is letting go of who we were, told we were supposed to be, what we were, told we should do, kind of all the masks that we wore in the first half and all the learning how to play by the rules and all the things that we were kind of taught to do became who we were or who I am. The me I identified with is really, a kind of defined for me in that first half. So sharing your gifts really at midlife is really about letting go of all that so that you can bring out who you really are, what your truth is, what your authentic self is. So I came by way of my own journey at midlife and then helping clients do that and really giving people permission that they maybe didn't have before to be themselves. It sounds so simple, but it's
Right.
especially in recovery. I mean, it's being yourself is it's the journey, really.
Right. I mean, yeah, I agree. It sounds so simple, and yet it's so profound. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share a little bit about your own journey in terms of how this developed internally, because to tell you the truth, and I have a background as a coach as well, a lot of coaches out there are branding from the outside in, right? They start out there somehow, like creating something that they latch onto. But I know you, Buck, and you really are branding from the inside out. And I think it's important for our listeners to hear a little bit more about what that journey has been.
Yeah, well, that I love that branding from the inside out. Yeah, my journey as a psychotherapist and a coach, but really as a, I attribute my journey in finding my gifts and activating my superpowers to like coming out when I was 15 and coming to terms with being this different little boy growing up in Texas. And, I mean, I had I always say I had a loving but very dysfunctional family, with a lot of addiction and all sorts of trauma. But within that experience, kind of tapping into somehow this, this sensitivity and this like grit and perseverance, and a lot of color. Just a very I used to dress up as Boy George. I grew up I was a child of the 80s, and I really like Boy George was like I loved Boy George. So I used to like put on drag, all my mom's drag, and then like go out as Boy George. But I somehow managed to, uh, come out both within myself, but then come out later as a gay adolescent and gay man, through that experience. And that really was the beginning of me working from the inside. I had to call deep on something, because honestly, no one really was around. And I was a classic Gen X latchkey kid, with parents who were boomers, kind of chasing their own dreams and also kind of lost in their own addictions and codependency. And so I was on my own with my sister. And so, that led me to ultimately to LA, to, I wasn't going to become a star, but I did go out there to heal. That was kind of my thing. I was going to go out and heal, and I was going to, I was like sober, and I'm 24, and I'm going to move to LA and like, I like go vegan and be like this like Southern California kid. Which eventually I became, I ventured into therapy and, started to facilitate healing, with people, which actually to take that back just a 1 minute, like I got into therapy when I was 15. So when I came out, my mom the next day left a post-it on my bedroom door that said, "I love you." And then I think the day after that, she was like, "And you're going to go to therapy," because she was like, "I don't know what to do with this. And like, you need help and I need help." She ended up in therapy actually after that. But um, that was the beginning of having to search inside. And I went through depression, various forms of addiction. Codependency is my drug of choice, um, along with a few other things. But that whole journey, really was, I had to find myself through that, and then eventually became, a professional healer. So it wasn't until later that I became a coach, and you, in fact, were my first introduction to coaching. That wasn't our relationship, because
Right.
you were my clinical supervisor, but you were a recovery coach.
Yes.
And I just remember thinking, oh, Andrew's a therapist and a coach, and somehow that's possible. But I, like you, I never wanted to be a coach who didn't work at a deep level.
I love that, right? Because it does distinguish you from the average coach out there. And although I believe wholeheartedly in coaching, I also believe it's a very particular model that is delicate and has a frame that you get to determine. And knowing you, Buck, I know you bring integrity to all of that. And so I'm just glad that things have unfolded in a way that you get to really play with both, because I think they're both so important. And the population that you work with, I understand, is helping folks in their 40s and 50s to reimagine life, which is a fantastic term, reimagining life, and to suggest that sharing one's unique gifts is one of the keys to a fulfilling midlife, right? So talk more about these gifts, and why is this also really important to a fulfilling life in recovery?
I love that. I love those questions. Yeah, so these gifts, like I said before, and when we think of gifts, I think we automatically go to like talents or achievements. or aptitudes. And so those are expressions of gifts, and those are a part of the gifts that I'm talking about. But really, the sort of core gift that I'm talking about sharing is really the gift of your contribution and participation in this, like, um, to this big mural, we're all painting together. And that sounds a little abstract and a little heady, but you said I go from the inside out, so that's definitely what I do. But these gifts are really about, um, again, this process of, once you strip away some of the prescriptions and the rules and maybe living for other people, then you start to, which of course we know is a difficult process in and of itself, to let go of the mask, and to, none of us will say, oh, um, I want to live by other people's rules. But then when we're faced with the reality of not doing that, it actually is it's scary. And so,
kind of naked, isn't it?
yes, exactly. That's a great word for it. You're just out there exposed, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I'm supposed to be myself now. So but that really is the key. So these gifts that I'm talking about, are really, one, your freak flag, if you want to call it that. But they're anything from the things that maybe you have a gift for verbal expression. Gifts are really about self-expression. They're about how we express who we are. So maybe your gift is about words, and it's about making sense of the complexity of life through words. That doesn't mean that you have to become a writer. Maybe it means, I have a podcast. And one of my gifts is communicating. I would much rather talk than write. Um,
Hmm.
or maybe one of your gifts is really about complex problem solving, which could mean lots of different things. Or one of your gifts maybe is about nature and loving nature. Or, like, for you have a gift that's deeply interpersonal. And so one of the things you said to me very early on is, like, I think you were saying a rabbi had told you once that 99% of the work in therapy is being present. Like, to me, that's a gift, like the ability, the capacity to be present. So when I'm encouraging people to think about their gifts, I'm really inviting them on a journey of curiosity
Hmm.
and gentle inquiry, um,
Hmm.
and um, and really any way that they can show up expressing themselves
Hmm.
authentically. And that could be and speaking of long-term sexual recovery or any recovery, that could very much be in a meeting. That could be in working your steps. Any opportunity where you are telling your story in an honest and authentic and genuine, real way is you sharing your essence. I get so much more out of, like, sitting with someone, having an authentic conversation, hearing their story, than I do about,
Hmm.
like, being impressed by someone's, like, achievements and accolades. Those are all gifts,
Hmm.
and that's great, but um I'm much more compelled by someone's truth. So,
Hmm.
does that make sense?
It does. And what I'm hearing is it's that heart space connection that's really moving for you.
Mm,
And for many of us, I think there's something about that is incomparable. But I just wanted to highlight something that I know about you, which elaborates on what you just said. Not only are you a terrific communicator and have a wonderful podcast, but but your presence is fantastic. And from the time I met you, the reason why I think we clicked and worked together so well is because both of us have, I think, cultivated that presence, and that's not something that can be taken lightly. It's
mm,
it's really a lifetime of being in the moment and really being able to authentically listen and understand. And I know
mm.
that those are things that you bring to your clients, which I have known for 16 years now.
Thank you. Yeah, just taking that into my heart.
Good, good. Please do.
It's a lovely thing to hear
Absolutely.
on a Friday afternoon. Thank you.
That's right.
Um,
That's right.
yeah, it's, I mean, and you're right. I love the language of
Hmm.
cultivating that space. And I don't think, you know, when I'm thinking about recovery, for instance, like that's so, my personal belief is that any, whether it's compulsive sexual behavior or, you know, any sort of addiction, that it starts out as as a, I mean, you said in your book, it's a heartbrokenness is the root cause. So it starts out as it is a heart venture in a way. You know, it is a way to get heart needs met,
Yeah.
that um, and to actually move closer to ourselves. And you know, I think unconsciously, but then of course the behaviors take over and they move us away from ourselves. And so, you know, this coming back to your gifts and discovering that you have gifts in long-term recovery especially is, um, I mean, so challenging, because you do really have to challenge all that negative programming that, you know, through um, years of however long, you know,
Hmm.
your problematic behaviors were, your addiction was, you know, if it was you know, a substance, all that stuff moves you away from your gifts and basically tells you you're not gifted and you don't have
Right.
gifts, and that you,
Right.
and like you're not cultivating, you can't cultivate presence because you can't be with yourself,
Hmm.
you know.
Right.
So I don't know where I was going with that, but
Well, what I heard, what I heard, Buck, is that um, gifts are sometimes buried treasure,
mm,
and it's not always easy to access them. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight is the fact that it's really scary to uncover one's gifts, right?
mm,
If there's been so much focus on what's wrong, and there's been trauma in the background, and there's been defects of character focused on, and all kinds of things that look at the problem, you're really shifting gears and saying, what's right in you? What is it that is really meaningful within you?
mm.
So what do you do with those fears and barriers that might come up for your clients?
Such a good question. So thank you for asking, because you're right. I mean, it is. I think this is where sometimes people foreclose and decide, nope, I'm not. I can't go any further. Which is, of course, heartbreaking to think that someone would not want to kind of, you know, they miss the buried treasure. You know, you sort of stop the search before you find the treasure. But you know, so, and I see this every day. You know, I see this with, you know, I recently did a consultation call with someone, and you know, I think he was just like, oh gosh, I'm not ready for that. And which I understood. But
Hmm.
you know, I always start with self-compassion. That to me is, you know, I've studied with Kristen Neff, and you know, that the mindful self-compassion work, and to me that is, I mean, it's challenging in and of itself, honestly, to kind
Yes.
of acknowledge just what you're feeling, and that like this is this is a moment of difficulty, this is a moment of suffering, that I have goodness, I can treat myself with loving kindness. That practice
Hmm.
alone is, um, is a tool that I start with. I don't know that there's, you know, I mean, without getting too far into the weeds of like therapy and things like that, you know,
Hmm.
that for me is just beginning to acknowledge, you know, that like, oh yeah, this is difficult for me to imagine myself as anything other than flawed, or
Hmm.
problematic or out of control, or traumatized. So
Hmm.
but then I think as we begin to do that, you know, beginning to then expand into looking at some of the stories and the narratives and thinking about the perceptions and beginning to make that distinction between the reality and my perception of reality. You know, it's one thing to have an image of myself as all negative and a narrative of myself that's saturated with problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's another thing for that to be true. I like to say to clients, feelings are real, but they're not necessarily true.
Mm-hmm.
So the experience, of course, is real. The story may not be entirely accurate. So if we can
Mm-hmm.
begin to sort of tell a new story, and that again at midlife is such a big piece of what I'm doing, and I think it's analogous to recovery, um,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, oh, I can write a different story. Um, and one of the things, again, to bring it back to like, how do I help clients sit with that? Are
Mm-hmm.
you familiar with Rick Hanson's work?
A little bit. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm not like super familiar with it, but he does talk about like the negativity bias and how our
Mm-hmm.
brains and are sort of like wired to only, or sort of like overvalue
Mm-hmm.
like the negative, and that
Right.
he talks about taking in the good
Mm-hmm.
and literally like for 20 seconds at a time see if you can't hold on to that good
Mm-hmm.
feeling. So see if I can't hold on for a moment to that feeling of like my that I have value, and that I
Mm-hmm.
just for being me, just for being worthy. And I can speak to that from my own experience because while I may have some talents as far as like uh, I have some talents, but like I've never really pursued anything to the point of like mastery, and I always
Mm-hmm.
felt bad about myself because of that. Um, and now I've sort of really flipped that script and realized like, oh, I have so many. I don't need to do anything to be a gifted person and have gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the fact that I'm here and care and have a heart and
Mm-hmm.
like show up every day, even if I'm lazy and unproductive and like
Mm-hmm.
don't want to go to work, um, that I still have gifts. So
Right.
part of this is like just helping people realize that you don't you don't have to do anything to to get in touch with your gifts and your
Mm-hmm.
giftedness.
Right. There's no pressure.
There's no pressure. No, it's the opposite of that,
Yeah.
honestly.
Right. Right.
That's all the kind of like the stuff that we have to slough off,
Right.
you know?
Right. Those ideas.
Right.
And it really is an identity shift, right? Because you're talking about giving up or sloughing off some of that old skin that doesn't belong anymore, and stepping into actually what's always been there.
Mm.
I call it your native talent, but we could call it
Mm.
anything that we're born with. That it's like reclaiming your birthright.
Mm.
And so what I heard, just to circle back to the question, is that it's about timing. And some people are in a place of readiness, and some people need to wait. And there's no right or wrong about that, of course, but I hear that you're carefully assessing when somebody is really in a position to take on the kind of experience that you offer them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you said that because I'm thinking of a course, a course that I'm creating a course on midlife, and
Yeah,
you know,
fantastic.
part of the and I love that native talent. I'm gonna have to reference you on that. But and also
Mm,
stepping into this, as
right,
you were saying, stepping into, I was thinking of embodying this new identity. And
right.
I mean, obviously you're a somatic experiencing practitioner, it's like this, that's such a big part of this. So
Hmm.
in my course there's a fair number of somatic practices to get people kind of into their bodies. And but one of the way the course is laid out is that the first phase of really reimagining your midlife is completing the past. So kind of letting go of some of the ghosts, exercising some of the ghosts, really
Right,
looking. It's also acknowledging the accomplishments of your
sure,
past. But
right,
this idea that if I step right into, I mean, maybe someone's done that work already, but if they haven't done that work, then that's, I'm not going to say like, oh, let's activate your superpowers.
right.
That's not, it's not time for that. Um, but I want them to know, like in the course, that's part of the trajectory of this. If you can do this this work of your past and releasing the things that no longer serve, the next phase is you get to get into your giftedness. I know you don't believe that now, but that's what I've seen, and that's what kind of how it works. If you want to, if you choose, so choose your own adventure. It's
Right.
if you choose to go there,
Mm-hmm.
you choose to think you can feel good about yourself.
Right. Right. And one thing that I remember working with my coach many years ago, I think back on this very fondly, is she used to say to me, sometimes I'll walk beside you, sometimes I'll walk behind you, and you get to choose how I participate in your process of discovery. And so it felt like there was a lot of room, even though she was right there with me. Ultimately, it was something that was up to me to just to step into it and to pace myself in that way. And she also had another saying. She would say that, and I'm probably going to misquote it, but it was something like, um, "It's not that anything has to happen, but it's simply what could happen."
Ooh, juicy.
Yeah, yeah. Right, because for me, it was like, "Oh, okay, so I get to play with the possibilities. I don't have to feel locked into anything."
Yes. Yeah, and you get to choose. I love that. It's
Right.
like you get to make the choice, and there's, yeah, play with possibility.
Right.
Right. That's what I mean, that for me was a game changer.
Right.
And what I my wish is for anyone, really, that, yeah,
Yeah.
there's to play with possibility, that there's possibility, has play too, has probably been, um has just not been a part of your experience,
Mhm.
perhaps,
Mhm.
and that's okay, and that's just been part of the journey, and actually is a part of what makes you you, and what
Mhm.
is part of your power, honestly,
Right.
and your purpose and all of that. But yeah, I love that, playing with possibility, and
Mhm.
but like having the space to
Right.
play, like you're in a field, like you don't have to go
Right.
anywhere, you just get to like be in an open space.
Exactly. Yeah. So I also am aware, Buck, that you work with a lot of different clients, but you specialize in working with gay men, especially gay men in midlife, to activate their superpowers. So I'm wondering, maybe if you could share a little bit more about what you mean by this. What is a gay superpower, and how does that fit into your course, to your work? Just so everyone has a sense of how that looks like and how it's applied.
Yeah, it's I love talking about gay superpowers, by the way. Regardless of whether I'm talking about gay or queer men or not, because I think everybody has gay superpowers. So the idea of gay superpowers came to me through my coach. So it's funny you were talking about your coach, my
Hmm.
former coach. Most
Hmm.
recently, my coach was Linda Landon, who you connected me with. So she and I connected after 14 years. Um,
Wow.
I know, yeah, crazy. So, but I read this book that my coach Ray Rigoglioso had written called Gamin and the New Way Forward, and it was based on his work with groups of gay men in New York City. And basically, he came up with this theory. It wasn't necessarily his own theory. It was um, kind of a continuation and evolution of queer male thought leaders. But basically, the idea was that gay men have a social and cultural purpose. We have a role to play, and that we have in society, and that it is time in evolution, our own evolution as a community or communities, and in our society as a whole, that we begin to honor and embrace that gay men, because of our experience growing up in a mostly heterosexual world, have certain experience, have perspectives, sensibilities, and ways of seeing the world, um, including gifts and certain hidden utilities that need, like, society needs us. Society needs its gay men. That's what Ray's like nutshell theory was. And he said that we all have gifts, which I've taken to call superpowers. And, some of those gifts, that he said, the capacity to be models of truly living authentically and truly being shame resilient, or
Mm,
being models of what he called sustainable manhood. I like to call it conscious masculinity. Um,
mm,
help, like, I think gay men are here potentially to help non-gay men release themselves from shame. But,
mm,
I think we have to do that we are called to do that first in a lot of ways.
mhm,
We talked about being a consciousness expander. So this really touched me, and the reason I translated it from gift to superpower is just because I saw it as, a tool. These are tools that, gay men end up using kind of unconsciously, to express our who we are, express our gifts in the world, and live our purpose. And the reason I emphasize this so much in my work with gay men is because there's such an emphasis on shame and self-loathing and having very low and or uncertain self-worth. So when I flip the script, or we flip the script rather, and we turn it on its head, and it's like, yeah, you got shamed and you feel shamed and you were othered and all that stuff, but that's just the beginning of your story. And in
mhm,
fact, all those experiences are actually what have created within you
mhm,
this these power tools, for lack of a better word, these
mhm,
ways of, like, existing in society,
mhm,
that are, like, shame busters, and are paradigm shifters. And so I think gay men tend to not acknowledge that. We come out and then it's like, okay, we're out, and now that's it. That was
mhm,
my gay experience. Other than, I know your listeners, this is not exclusively LGBTQ or anything, but
mhm,
oftentimes we struggle in our community with mental health issues, with things like that, because of depression and discrimination, all that stuff. So I'm really trying to challenge that narrative.
mhm,
No, actually, you're actually far more powerful than you know. And so that's where I got into the idea of superpowers, and we all
mhm,
can relate to superheroes, and it's something that is
mhm,
we love, and it's like we all like the idea of a hidden utility,
mhm.
you know, um, and kind of being stealth.
Right.
So it's that sort of way that you move in the world that, like, maybe people don't know you have a superpower, but
Mhm,
you're, using it for good, of course.
mhm.
This is we're not talking about for evil.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, right? Yeah, if you're not conscious, then yes, your superpowers will be used for evil. But so yeah, it's just this idea of, if our gifts are like who we are, then our superpowers are, the tools we use to express those or
Sure.
express that.
And we're almost out of time, but I wanted to just ask you if there is anything in particular, or maybe a few things that you really want to highlight to let our listeners know what you feel you would like them to take from our conversation today.
Absolutely. And this is actually tied to the superpower conversation, because the way, just like with gay men, the superpowers for us are found through the adversity and through the otherness and the things that we would consider our worst wounds. So I'm thinking of your listeners in long-term recovery, or maybe newer in recovery, that I really want to encourage you, if you're struggling with not feeling powerful right now, or you're not tapping into your power, to look to your recovery. That is, to use your language, a buried treasure of your superpowers. So potentially
Mm,
it could be about, you are called to heal. You are called to sit with suffering. You are called to be accepting of 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 people, or, with folks in long-term sexual recovery, you're called to be a sexual leader
mm,
and to help people redefine intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when that, I mean, I think that's like amazing to think of folks in long-term
Mm-hmm.
sexual recovery as the
Mm-hmm.
teachers
Mm-hmm.
and the models of sexual health. I mean, who better?
It's incredibly beautiful. I'm vibrating with what you're saying. Yes, because that's the sexual health model right there.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
I mean, that's it's in your book too. I was going to reference your section on purpose, and
Mm.
but yeah, it's, and not, again, to your point about timing, don't feel pressure. I know I get all vibraty too and excited and like, but that's like, that comes in time, and that's your choice.
Right.
You don't have to, that doesn't mean you have to go be a teacher of sexual health, but you are a model of it.
Right. And isn't it one person at a time, right? It might be
Yes.
a partner or a child or a friend, but it doesn't have to be grand. We're not talking about superpowers taking over the world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. That's, I think we get caught in that it has to
Mm-hmm.
be grand and big and all over social media with followers. No, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, 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 not at all. Yeah. Impact is one person at a time.
Yeah. Anything else you want to share before we wind down?
No, I feel really grateful to be here. And I just thank you for the opportunity. And for anyone who out there who's listening and feels maybe that there's a voice inside them that is saying, yeah, I think I have some gifts, or I think I have maybe some special, unique superpowers, that there's a way for you. First of all, yes, you do, for sure. And that that's your soul calling, really. And yes, it's kind of intimidating to think of it that way.
Mm.
But we're all on that journey. That's sort
Mm-hmm.
of the stuff of life. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
good stuff. If you are getting that call, um, then please do us all a favor and share that with us. Like,
Mm-hmm.
cause I want to see your gifts and like your superpowers. Cause I don't have all of them. We
Mm-hmm.
all are here to like participate and contribute. So that's my kind of parting
Parting
gift.
gift. That's right. That's fantastic. So thank you, Buck. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to see you, and I look forward again to crossing paths once more in different ways. I know that there's a lot of folks out there who are going to benefit from your new course and how things are unfolding for you. And by the way, I don't know if we said this, but as a coach, Buck is available to folks all over the country.
Yes.
So it's really important to know that although he's based in Austin, Texas, any of you who are listening can contact him, and he's well worth it. So I can highly, highly recommend Buck as a coach and a therapist. And
Thank you.
I will end it there, and we'll be in touch one way or the other.
Thank you, Andrew. This has been a real treat.
In here. Take good care.
You too. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening today. It was such a treat to share the time with my colleague and old friend, Buck Dodson, and discussing this really vital topic that affects those affected by compulsive sexual behavior. Please be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes or share our podcast on Spotify. And if there are any topics that you would like us to discuss in the future, just let us know. I look forward to you joining us on future podcasts, and thanks again for being with us today.